So hello and happy Friday. Today is Friday, March the 4th. This is episode number 149 of Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers. Guess what the temperature is outside? How about that sweet opening where it was frozen this morning, 3 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 16 degrees Celsius, and then by 1 o'clock in the afternoon it was all the way up to 30 degrees Fahrenheit and minus 1 Celsius. So that's what we're dealing with this time of year. Super cold mornings and warm up afternoons. And then this weekend is the weekend to check your beehives because there's lots of warmth coming our way. They promise us that it will hit the 60s on Sunday. That's the time to check everything. Things are happening. Things are really hopping here. So I want to welcome you. This is The Way to Bee. And questions were submitted through the past week. Lots going on, lots of interviews happening. So if you missed those, please check the channel. And there's a whole playlist that are just interviews with experts, people, new things going on in beekeeping. And more of those to come, by the way, because some people liked them. So that's great. Let's jump right in with today's topics. First question comes from Lana Dement. And could you please clarify the number and sizes of entrances in different seasons, which can include bottom and or top entrances with or without robbing screens compared to ventilation requirements, which can include screened bottom boards, top vented feeder boxes, shims, or screened holes in boxes in different seasons. This is much simpler than you might think. Now, where am I located? Northwest Pennsylvania. So that's my climate. Southern people might have to do different things. Extreme northern people, beekeepers up there, might have to do different things. So what I have done today is we have other questions about entrance sizes and things like that. But I'm going to jump right into it early, I think, because I'm putting it in my title today. My final configuration to date for beehive layouts. Because guess what? I'm not doing a bunch of changes throughout the year. Some people think about insulation just for wintertime. Well, it could benefit your bees year-round because insulation on the top of your hive can help your bees along in summertime as well as winter, shielding them from heat in summer, holding the heat inside the hive in wintertime. And if you insulate any part of your beehive, if you're just down to the bare minimum, you should insulate the hive cover. So I'm going to show you a drawing here. Now what I've arrived at, I have different hive configurations. So this will be the most popular. In other words, the most popular beehive anywhere in the world is the Langstroth beehive. I know some people don't like it, but that's the way it is. And we also have a long Langstroth hive here and the Layens hive, and we're going to talk a little bit about those too because we have other questions coming up. But I'm going to show you this really difficult to follow drawing to some degree. But I'm also, by the way, going to put a drawing on my main website, fredsfinefowl.com, and in the horizontal hive page. I know it's going to be cluttered, but I'm going to have this drawing for you too. But anyway, I want to talk about my final configuration, what I've come down to. And I'm just going to show you the components really fast, right? So what I've done through the years, and this is what I've arrived at here in my backyard apiary after experimenting with bees and doing incremental changes through the years. So give you a little background probably, that's helpful. When I first started setting up the hives, I followed a lot of research about internal condensation, what's going on with the bees in the summertime during nectar flows and things like that, which led me to have upper entrances, upper venting. Because the thinking is, I mean, it's logical, right? That your bees would want to vent off the warm, humid air and it would help them dehumidify the honey. So it would concentrate that and they would finish it quicker. Plus, I had this thought, and I used to talk about it all the time. Bees are coming through the entrance on the landing board. If they're foraging bees, they have to get their nectar up to where it gets stored in the honey super. So if that's in the upper boxes, why not have the entrance up there, and then the bees come right down into the area where the nectar is being stored, being turned into honey, and they wouldn't be going through the brood and everything else. But you know what's cool about beekeeping? I've learned more through the years about honeybee biology and what goes on. So it's much more complex than you might initially think, because what a lot of people do is put queen excluders in their beehives. I don't use queen excluders, and I'm about to explain why. But this is the configuration. The bottom board. So I've decided on a solid bottom board as my bottom board of choice. This is a reversible one. So this is a winter and a summer setting for that. It doesn't matter for me because I'm going to put an insert in there, an entrance reducer, and we've also arrived at a final most effective entrance reducer size. And that is 2 1/4 inches long for that entrance reducer opening, and then 3/8 of an inch in height. Because I found out through years of observation with my video cameras that mice can't get into that. So that eliminates my need to have a mouse guard on the hive. So if I have a 3/8 inch high opening, and then I don't have to worry about pulling off a mouse guard to clean out the dead bees from the hive. So why this 2 1/4 inch width for that opening? And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to explain my thinking behind everything right along the line. So we want to be able to scrape out dead bees on the landing boards in the wintertime. This hive tool fits into that. Straight in, scoop to the side, pull your dead bees out. This was my first winter using this hive cleanout tool, which I got from Better Bee, but it's by Bee Smart Designs. It's under $5. So this is my queen out tool. So this dictates the opening size of my entrance reducer, because the bees can use that same size. And I've had conversations with other beekeepers. I mean, that's what you're doing here. You're looking to see what another beekeeper might think, how they set things up, and the reasoning behind it. That's why I'm explaining all these details. So no queen excluder necessary because the mice can't get in. It facilitates using a clean out tool to scrape dead bees out during wintertime. And it is open enough for your bees to come and go. What if you live further south? Well, I had an interesting talk with Mr. Ed. So we did an interview there. If you missed it, you might want to check that out too. And we talked about, he actually uses a smaller entrance than this. So actually, mine's a little larger than Jeff uses right now. And that's because the observation came about, what are the bees doing in natural cavities that they find, or when they move into unnatural cavities that they find in old abandoned structures and things like that. Tiny entrances, even on hot days. They still store lots of honey. They dehumidify the honey and everything else. So stay with me for a minute and I'll explain the rest of the configuration. Solid bottom board, entrance reducer. Next one up is a slatted rack. Some people have never heard of them and don't use them. Why do I use a slatted rack? Well, it's a 2-inch spacer that sits right on the bottom board. And this 2-inch spacer has slats that run parallel to the frames in the deep box up above. Do they really need to align exactly over each frame that's inside that box? No, they really don't. But by having the slatted racks in there, we limit the bees' amount of burr comb and comb extension that they will build into that space. Creates an airspace between the entrance down here and the brood box, which is the next box up. So by setting up this airspace, it means that your queen will now use the full depth of the frames in that deep box, and she'll use all the cells right on down there. And if you're installing a package of bees or a swarm of bees, much easier because the surplus bees go right down into that space provided by the slatted rack. And then you can put all your frames in right away and close it up right away. Brand new hive, ready to go. So far we've got a solid bottom board, 18 inches off the ground to keep skunks away. Entrance reducer, I gave you the size for that and why. And then we've got the 2-inch spacer slatted rack, deep brood box. That is your beginning configuration. And then I want to look at the sides here. If you notice, when we look at beehives, most people, like me too, I mean, we buy hive equipment. These are only 3/4 of an inch thick. And one of the things that always bothers me about that is, once again, these are built for commercial beekeeping. So you can put all the equipment right next to each other, save space and everything else. But let's say we're backyard beekeepers, which we are, and we don't need to save all that space, because we're talking 2, 3, 4, 10 hives on average, right? So instead of reducing the thickness of that pine sidewall, why don't we attach lifting cleats onto the side? And these lifting cleats are beveled down a little bit so they shed rain and everything. But instead of reducing the thickness of the sidewall, attach 1x4s that are cut up to match, and then just screw those right onto the sidewall and glue them, screwed and glued together, because the glue will also keep condensation out from between the two pieces of wood, and you'll last a really long time. So now we haven't reduced the thickness, we've added to the thickness, and we can still grab and pick them up. And guess what? Grabbing a cleat like that is much easier than sticking your fingers into the little cutouts, which reduce the thickness. When you use thermal imaging gear and you look at the sidewall of your beehives in wintertime, there's quite a bit of heat escaping through those little cutouts, because think of the thickness of the wood where those handholds are cut out. So instead, put a cleat on. Next thing that I've arrived at, we have the hive visor that we put on there. Hive visors, they don't just look cool. You know, it's a little awning that sticks out that has screws going to the side. There's a video that shows you how to make your own. I didn't invent it. It's just something that is logical and natural to put on the front of your hive, which, by the way, I wrote here in the bottom, faces south by southeast here in the northern hemisphere. And that's because the south by southeast facing landing boards perform statistically better. It doesn't mean that you can't send your bees in other directions or have beehives with opposing landing boards and things like that. It's just statistically what works best for the bees. Melt soft snow first in the summertime, and so on. The hive visor provides shade across the front. Midsummer heat, it drops the face of the hive, based on my measurements, 15 degrees or more. What else does it provide for? The other thing is it's movable. So you have these thumb screws that go in here. You can move this up and down in the face of your hive, lower if you want to really keep the snow and stuff off. Really demonstrated well this year that it keeps snow off your landing board entrances. And the other thing is, when there's a cluster of bees on the front, when your bees are bearding on the front of your hive, they move up underneath this visor, and then that way the bees are protected. Inclement rain, something like that, sudden problem comes up with weather, they're all sheltered up under that and they're doing fine. And so that gives them a place to cluster and be protected, conserve their energy, while the bees inside are dehydrating. So the next thing that goes on, and this answers the question too, when should you add a super? Well, when 8 out of 10 of these frames are full of brood and resources, which we're talking about honey and pollen stored in there too, 8 out of 10, it's time to go ahead and add. And when I add on boxes, they're all mediums. I used to do double deeps. I have a couple double deeps out there right now. But when it comes to honey production and what your bees need for winter, it's been my experience, about 47 pounds of honey in a 10 frame medium super on average. You could get more or less. But if that's full of honey and that sits on your brood box, those bees are set in my climate for wintertime. So none of that is for the beekeeper. The next thing, when this gets full, again, 8 out of 10 frames, if they're filling it up, when should you add a super? That's another question that came this week to me. So, well, when 8 out of 10 frames are being worked and the bees have got honey full, we want to prevent them from becoming what's known as honey bound, because we want to keep them using this box down here primarily for brood. If they complete this with honey, then they'll start to store honey down below, and that's what we call being honey bound, when they start storing their nectar in all the cells that otherwise would be used for egg laying by the queen. So we would expand up from there. So my configuration now is also to have an insulated inner cover. So the insulated inner cover directly on top of that top feeder box is the winter configuration. Deep box, medium super, insulated inner cover, and then a feeder shim on top of that, which accommodates a rapid round, or it accommodates fondant or a sugar brick or something else. And then above that, insulated cover. And you might be thinking to yourself, wow, Fred, you're covering a lot of ground. And that's not a very good drawing. It doesn't look like it's very well organized. So I'm having troubles maybe visualizing what that would look like in the bee yard. Oh look, I just happen to have another drawing. This is my hive configuration now. So when you look at my videos and I show the bee yard, you'll see this quite frequently. So this for me, after all the years that I've been keeping bees, is my ultimate setup, and I'll explain why. I've already explained the individual components, but let's look at this here. What's going on is I've got a hive stand that looks too large for the hive, right? A lot of people want to build a hive stand that is almost exactly the footprint of the hive. I say put your hive stand up here and leave plenty of space off to the side, which looks like this is set up for two hives side by side, but it isn't. What I like to do is set up the hive to one side, and that way, guess what happens? When I need to pull the lid off and I'm going to do a look-see, I have space to lean it here. I don't have to put anything on the ground. That's good because I don't want my bees on the ground. I don't want a bunch of grass clippings and stuff sticking to my inner cover when it goes to the ground. So I keep everything up and we'll set it right on the space right here. What if this hive is getting very populated and I want to do a split? Oh look, I've got a work surface already here in my oversized hive stand, and that is a nucleus box. You could also just set another hive box there. Now what we're doing is we're pulling frames out of here and putting them right there, and it's all organized and up again off the ground. See how easy that is? Now if I'm just taking the cover off, we're doing an inspection, we lean that over here. Look, there's also a bracket just to hang your smoker or your sugar syrup sprayer or whatever you happen to be using. This is all set up for utility. It makes it convenient for you. So we've got the deep box, we've got the hive visor, we've got a medium super. Now they started to fill that up, we got another super. Then what do we have above that? An insulated inner cover. What do we have above the insulated inner cover? A feeder shim that will accommodate even a gallon feeder, and that has to be insulated as well. And then on the very top, what do we have? Insulated outer cover. So no, my sidewalls are not insulated. It's the standard thickness. Look at these cleats on the sides. Those are your lifting handles. So I don't want to reduce the thickness of the boxes. We start with a deep brood box. We've got, of course, the slatted rack underneath, solid bottom board below that. The only concession with the solid bottom board that I also like are the screen bottom boards that are enclosed. So in other words, there's a tray that you pull out, just like the flow hives and things like that have, but you can close it off completely so that, and there are times when you want your bees to be able to control airflow in and out of the hive. Screen bottom boards that are open to the outside take away that for the bees. So I like the screens to be enclosed because that's part of IPM, Integrated Pest Management. So this is my current total favorite hive configuration. So if we took the nucleus box away and the lid away, that's what your hive would look like. It looks asymmetrical, maybe doesn't seem right to you. And then of course, when it comes time to strap down your hive, your straps go down to the support stand here. So I highly recommend making your stand longer than it needs to be, so you've got a staging area for all your stuff. So what do you think? So I'll put that also on my website so you can see it. That's my configuration right now, my favorite one. So that answers question number one. Through the seasons, what's a configuration change? Do I set it up differently for winter? Nope. Summer? Nope. It's all the same. There's no swapping out or anything else. The insulated cover, the insulated inner cover, the insulated feeder shim stays the same. Summer or winter makes no difference. Then everything below also stays the same. The only thing that's going to change is how many medium supers you've got on there going through winter and through summer. So when you pack down for wintertime, you have the deep and the medium super on top of that, and that's a minimum winter configuration for a colony that's been throughout the summer. Some of the hives have wintered in single deeps. That's because they were late season swarms. But what do they have over the top of the single deep? Insulated inner cover, feeder shim, insulated outer cover. And the feeder shim, we insulate the interior sidewalls of the feeder shim too. Let me know what you think of that, because that's working, by the way. Pretty exciting times. These warm-ups come along and the bees are flying. Everything's looking good. And it makes you feel like you almost know what you're doing with those bees. But don't trust them yet. They can teach us that we don't know what we think we know. But that's my current configuration. No top venting, no top insulation. Oh yeah, I didn't address that. Hey Fred, why don't you have top venting on the system? What did I say that I don't use? You know it's not in the stack anywhere? There's no queen excluder. And this gets reinforced every time I talk to other beekeepers. Talk amongst yourselves, mill about smartly. See what you're seeing when you find the bees on their own. Because where do bees concentrate their brood? You're going to find the answer to be the same over and over and over. There will be anomalies. There will be some odd things once in a while that get a little different. But statistically, 90+% of the time, your brood is all going to be concentrated down here because this is where the entrance is. So if you're one of those people, well, I put upper entrances in, I use top venting and things like that. You can, but you're going to need a queen excluder. That's because when there's an upper vent, that means that they have opportunity to get right up here and start laying eggs and everything else, because they can also ventilate and control the brood area, which is their most critical air control area. But if you have no upper entrance, if you have no upper venting, what do the bees store up above the brood? After they establish that second box, what I call the honey bridge, when they get up there, what's in the upper box? Honey, nothing but honey. Why? There's no ventilation up there. They're not encouraged to lay eggs up there, to have brood up there, because they don't control the airflow at the top as well as they do down near the entrance through the year. That's another reason why I don't use upper venting or upper entrances. And another reason why is because we know more about the thermodynamics inside the hive when it comes to winter time. So, no venting off of their valuable warm air, that heat capsule that's established. Once again, reinforce over and over by evaluating the climate inside the hive during wintertime when the cluster is near the top or in the top third of the box. The condensation doesn't form directly over the bees. If that inner cover is insulated, it forms to the sidewalls to provide the bees with the water resource that they need through condensation in winter. Many benefits. This is not the only way to keep your bees. I'm just sharing what I'm doing. After many years of fooling around with all of the other setups. Now the other thing is too, we have other hives that are insulated. So one of the things I notice about the insulated hives is that they don't fly as early or as frequently as those in the uninsulated hives. So then there are trade-offs there too. So I'm not saying don't insulate the sidewalls of your hives if that's what you want to do. I'm just saying it may not be necessary depending on where you live. It hasn't proven to be necessary here. Question number 2 from Brian D., Danville, California. Can you discuss how to determine if a hive is doing normal orientation flights in spring versus a fire drill that is a precursor to swarming? So if you're like me, and I hope you are, when it comes to staring at bees, not the way you dress and stuff like that. But I hope you enjoy going out, which is what I'm going to be doing tomorrow and Sunday, staring at the bees. And in spring, what's happened? There have been a lot of bees that have emerged from their cells. They're brand new and they've not been outside before. So what they're going to do is fly for the first time. They're going to go out on the warm days and they're going to hover around in front of the hive. But as described here too, there's something called a fire drill, which is when a colony has built up and it's strong and it's about to get rid of the existing queen and replace her with new queens. That's when you get a lot of bees flying out in front and then going back inside the hive. And you can go out into your apiary with your cup of hot chocolate or your coffee or tea, whatever you have, and you hear this intense noise in the air. So you know that there are thousands of bees on the wing. It sounds like a swarm. And then when you go out and you look at it and you get concerned, you're paying attention. But what are the bees doing? They're actually just hovering in front of the hive. They're hovering, right? And then they're collecting sometimes on the face of the hive. So they're also kind of bearding on the front. But what they are doing is they're staging to deploy, right? which is different. That's actually a fire drill, and they eventually go back in. And you'll see the worker bees also flying out, flying in. So they go in the entrance and they come back out, hover, and go back in. This hovering pattern is the giveaway. That's more of a fire drill, because the bees that are learning to fly, they're doing orientation flights. When they come out, they fly in these figure 8 configurations because they're not flying out and just staring at the hive and hovering out here to see if the queen might come out and depart. Instead, they're looking at everything around them. So they're flying this figure 8 and they're noticing the whole geography. They're registering it. They're filling their little brains with the patterns that they're seeing. Physical configuration of the hive, the tree over here, the horizon over there, and then they're going back in. And because so many of them are hatching at the same time, they're emerging from their cells by the thousands. Let's say 1,000 a day. That's a lot of bees. And then because the weather suddenly broke, they're all flying out. They're doing this orientation. Now, when they're going on they're learning to scout an area, the ones that are coming out, and the orientation flights are pretty satisfied. They're getting a little stronger, a little healthier, a little tougher. Then they start to do the corkscrew. It looks like a tornado because they fly in circles ever larger as they rise up, and then you'll see them head out in one direction. It's kind of rare to see them go from the figure 8, right, the look around, into the circles, the ellipses, as they go up, unless they're ready to fly off somewhere else. You rarely see that circle go up and then come back down and then go in. So it's the figure 8s. So those that are coming out, hovering and landing, and then coming out again and hovering for a while and landing and collecting and waiting for the queen to leave, fire drill. Figure 8s, orientation. Ellipses going up, foragers or scouts heading out, because they're registering the entire landscape as they go, and they're also registering the position of the sun, and off they go. So, it's a lot of fun. I hope you watch for it, and when you see those different patterns, now you'll understand what they're doing. Question number 3. It's kind of a long one here from Ryan of San Antonio, Texas. Let's see, I've been designing some new insulated beehives, and I have discovered that standard deep boxes are 9 5/8 inches tall, while deep frames measure 9 1/8 inch from the top to the bottom, which means there is 1/2 inch of vertical empty space in the standard breed box. Problem is that if you stack multiple deep boxes, then you end up with a full 1/2 inch of empty space between the frames in the first box and the second box. So top of the frames in the lower box, bottom of the frames in the second box, 1/2 inch of space. Interesting. Okay. And which is larger than the maximum bee space? Bee space is 3/8 of an inch, for those of you who don't know. And thus should eventually build burr comb on the frames to fill an extra space. The same situation should also occur between the bottom of the frames and the bottom board. Rarely, by the way, because they rarely, if ever, extend from the bottom of the frames to the bottom board. They leave an air gap there. And also above to the inner cover. They do build burr comb up to the inner cover as well. Now there are configurations where people eliminate that space on top. They'll put a piece of cotton duck canvas up there, and then they put that directly on the backs of the frames up there. Then they put the inner cover, or they just put a migratory cover on top of that. So there's the canvas, which gets impregnated with propolis. And there is a reason for that space, by the way, over the top of the frames, but I'll read on first. In short, the standard Langstroth hive violates maximum bee space above, below, and between frames. And that probably explains why I see so much burr comb in seasonal beehives in various people's YouTube videos. Okay, now to the sides also, when you push all your frames together, we actually want that extra space. So if it's a 10-frame box and you push them all to the middle and you have the space on either side, you need to be able to pull your frames to the side when you begin your inspections. If the box were designed to go right up to those frames and it was a tight fit, then you have nowhere to pull them to the side before you lift them out, and then you risk rolling the bees that are on the surface of the comb down there, and one of those bees that you roll could be the queen. So you want to be able to pull your frames to the side, then lift them up, because there can be irregular frame faces down there, comb faces down there. So as they come up, they can scrape against each other. So pull them to the side, lift them out. So that's valuable space. But I'm getting to something here. The other thing is the space is over the top, the backs of the frames that are in there. So here's the box. You have this much space above the frames before you get to the next box. The bees like to be able to move over the top of the frames as well. They'll fill those gaps as described with burr comb. Burr comb is just extra honeycomb in places that we don't want the bees to build it, but they do to fill the gap. So anything over 3/8 of an inch, they build comb. Under 3/8 of an inch, they have the potential to propolize it and seal it up completely. That's where bee space came from. Dr. Lorenzo Langstroth came up with it. And the removable frames, of course. So I don't see this as a bad idea, and we're going to go on and talk about this a little more. Also, the other thing is over the tops of the frames, if the frames came right to the top of the box, and you had your inner cover, for example, and things like that, you wouldn't be able to put things like sugar, emergency feeding in winter and things like that. So it does accommodate fondant, pollen packs and things like that. For those who do that, you have space to do it. If there's no space there, you have no space to do it. Now you have to put a feeder shim on for everything. But the way the boxes are configured now with those spaces factored in, you can put fondant or pollen packs or things like that. Also for those who put in Formic Pro and treatments like that, or that are packs or gels, they also need space to fit in. So that space has a utility aspect, and you can also scrape that away because guess what cells get built in between the frames like that? Drone cells. So you can also storage, they can put honey in there, but that's your scrapings that you collect and when you're doing your inspections. So it's not totally lost, it's not all terrible, and the bees configure it so that they have airflow through there the way they want it to be. So it says I'm only a second-year beekeeper, so I haven't had to deal with a whole lot of burr comb yet, but I wonder if bee space violation impedes the bees' movement through the hive, and or causes the bees to festoon in the extra space instead of doing their useful tasks. So in other words, does the space encourage them to goof off? Festooning, by the way, is when bees are hanging and they're connecting their feet together, so you see a little chain of bees, that's festooning, right? And then they're measuring the space, so then they build comb down. So, interesting. I'm glad that he actually used that term there. So doing these little tasks, and then so my questions for you are, why is the extra space present in the Langstroth configuration? Can I make my brood boxes 1/8 of an inch shorter so that I have exactly the maximum bee space between my frames? You could, but you want to have space to do the things that I was just describing. And then 3/8 of an inch above bees burr comb, is scraping comb off necessary to hinder, is scraping that comb off going to noticeably hinder the bees? No, but it gives them something that they have to, of course, reconstruct. So every time you get into the hive, if you could, in theory, limit that to a 3/8 inch space over the top of the bars of the bottom box and below the upper box, you've established bee space, and you should, in theory, see less comb construction there. Sorry for the lengthy technical questions, but I find it really curious that bee space is such a vital concept to beekeeping, and yet the common configuration of equipment out there obviously disregards it. But here's the thing that I want to provide you. So if you're listening via podcast on Podbean, the way to be, you need to click on this link in order to see this, but there are links down in the video description that will take you to further information. So one of the things I want you to see today is you go down in the video description, I'm going to connect you to Bee Culture's October 21st of 2016 issue, the original Langstroth Hive. So, the original Langstroth Hive, by the way, Lorenzo Langstroth, if you've not seen the book, The Hive and the Honeybee, there's a new edition of it, by the way. It's a monster of a book, super thick, full of drawings, updated information. But he actually had 5 designs, some of them with glass panels and things like that. So while he was working on the different hive configurations, utilizing bee space as his guide, and then establishing the right depth of a frame, and that frames could be removable, and what would cause the bees not to fill all these working spaces, to make it easier for the beekeeper to remove and inspect comb with less impact on the bees. then that's in those drawings. And there is a woodworker by the name of Peter Sealing who builds one of Langstraw's original hives based on his dimensions, specs, and plans. So look at the Bee Culture October 21st issue of 2016. I'll link it down below and you can check it out. Maybe you'll want to build one yourself. One of the cool things about that is he had where the landing board is on these Langstraw hives that we set up. We put a piece of wood as a landing board. He's got canvas in there. Pretty interesting. So worth a look. For those of you who are wood crafters, take a look at that. Question number 4. This is from Robin Coolidge, Lancaster, Ohio. I have built a simple pollen feeder from PVC pipe. Is there anything I need to do beyond adding pollen sub to the feeder to help the bees find it? Lemongrass oil or other attractants, or is pollen sub enough? Thank you. By the way, the pollen sub, the most proven to be beneficial dry pollen substitute on the market right now is still Ultra B dry pollen substitute, which is made by Manlake. But I do want to talk a little bit about the feeders. You don't need to put anything else in. The scout bees are going to find it. And there's something about the way Ultra B dry pollen sub smells. The bees come to it almost immediately, which is really, really interesting to me. And you could think, well, they must have eaten it before. That's how they know that the smell is right. But in the springtime, the very first time you walk out there with an open pollen sub feeder and the scouts are scouring around, all of a sudden zip right up to you and go right to that feed, it's very interesting. They find it. There is something I want to talk about, though, when it comes to making your own feeders. I think it's a great idea to make your own pollen substitute feeders, but I want to caution you about using things that are smooth on the inside. So these PVC pipes a lot of people make, and a lot of people, there are gutter attachments and gutter fittings and things like that that people use, and they're nice and big, but the bees get in there. And what they tend to do, the other thing is make sure that your feeder is kind of dark, because the bees follow the light when they're in there and they need to get out. The interior surfaces, if they're really smooth, once they get into the dry pollen sub, there's a dust up, and the little particles of pollen sub stick all over the interior surfaces. And eventually what you're going to see is a bunch of bees unable to walk up the walls because they have all these pollen dust specks all over the bottoms of their feet, which have little pads which get sticky, which allow them to walk up glass and plastic surfaces and things like that. That stickiness, that adhesion capability is defeated by the pollen sub. So unfortunately, you might look in there and find a bunch of dead bees in your pollen because they'll be covered in pollen they can't see. It's all over their eyes and everything else. And their feet are covered in this dust, so they can't climb up the smooth surfaces. So when I figured out, now I've not used the PVC ones, I'm just cautioning you that if you're using it, take a look. See what they're doing. See if they're having troubles getting out of there once they're in, because once there's a feeding frenzy and they're all over that, they're shoving each other's faces in the pollen, they're all getting covered while they get their own pollen, and eventually if you've got a handful of dead bees in there, not a very good surface texture. So what I do is I stick egg cartons, not the plastic ones, the paper ones, the cardboard ones, and I pour all the pollen sub in these, and you can slide this right into your PVC pipe, and then now they have footing. They get in there. I have not found a single honeybee stuck in and unable to get their footing on one of these inserted egg cartons. So the other thing is, some people also use old hive equipment, landing board, bee box, inner cover, and then if you're going to put jars and things like that inside that configuration, again, we have a glass jar on its side. Bees get in there, dust gets up on the interior surface of the glass jars, and then you're disappointed when you go to replenish your pollen sub and you pull out the jars and there's a bunch of dead bees in them. Same thing, they lost their footing, they can't fly right away because they have to be able to climb out with their feet, groom themselves clean, and then fly. For some reason, they just can't rise right out of the pollen and fly out the door. So there again, consider establishing something that gives them really good footing while you protect this, of course, from rain and dew and condensation. So the other thing is I don't leave pollen feeders out overnight, because the pollen substitute itself, which has the consistency, as I've said, of talcum powder, Once it's out overnight, if you have condensation, heavy dew, things like that, it'll also cause the pollen sub to clump up, and the bees will still kind of use it. But if you could get it in overnight and then put it back out when you know the weather's good and the bees are going to be flying, you can also keep other pests out of your pollen by doing that, because if you leave it overnight, you'll have small hive beetles and things like that that can also be attracted to it. So pull it in overnight, keep it dry, take it out again when you know it's not going to be raining and when the weather's going to be good and it's going to favor the bees getting in there. So good footing. Check it out and see how they do. But you do not have to put anything out to attract them, because the bees do a fantastic job of finding that on their own. Something about the smell of Ultra Bee. I have nothing to do with Man Lake. It's just the only really good pollen substitute out there. Question number 5. This comes from Sarah Nettesheim. I just observed something really interesting. I have several bags of used coffee grounds collected for the garden, and they are attracting a lot of honeybees. Do you know why the bees would be or would like coffee grounds? Is it minerals, protein? I've also observed the bees congregate around my chicken feed bin and found out chicken feed is like a pollen substitute when there is no forage available. What resourceful little creatures bees are. Foraging bees are numbskulls. I'm sorry, I have to call them out on this. Because you're going to see the same knuckle-headed foraging bees in sawdust bins packing the sawdust on their corbicula and forming them. They use their mandibular glands and they add nectar to that, and they're going to use it to pack the sawdust under their legs, and off they fly. So they have no sense when it comes to getting pollen substitute once they're out there. Now, where do they figure that out? Do they feed that to the baby bees inside, to the larvae? No, because the nurse bees are smart enough to reject that pollen. So if you put chalk dust out there, your bees will get out there and get in the chalk dust. If you see these groundskeepers at baseball diamonds and they're spreading that chalk to mark the lines and things like that, you'll even see honeybees getting into the chalk dust. It has nothing to do with nutritional value and everything to do with texture. Now, when it comes to coffee grounds and stuff like that, if they're damp, if they're wet, then I could see the bees drinking from the coffee grounds. But they go after any powdery substance, and then guess what? It's up to those nurse bees inside the hive to decide whether that nutrition is worth anything. Because the foraging bees that go out that collect these pollen subs, or pollen itself, hopefully eventually they find real pollen, and they're encouraged because they also come into the hive and there's a designated area inside the hive, usually near the brood. And it's what I call the dance floor. And you'll find out that that's where the bees that are coming in carrying cargo, like a really good nectar source, or they've got a good pollen source, they go to that dance floor and they start to do their waggle dance, and you'll see a bunch of other foragers that are looking at them, and their antennae are out and they're touching them because they're smelling and tasting and everything else. And if it's no good, they start to ignore the waggle dancer. So reject, we don't want it. And then they go off and then they scratch it off from their hind legs themselves. That's the problem too. So they're putting it in a cell that later some nurse bee has to come around, and instead of working it up and mending that so that it'll ferment and become bee bread, because it's sawdust or it's somebody's thrown out coffee grounds or something else that has no nutritional value for the baby bees, they'll ignore it or they'll try to clean it out. And if they ignore it, it just ends up being a little cell of pollen in a pollen area that just doesn't get used, and it gets encapsulated or mummified and left and ignored until somebody else just has a lot of extra time on their hands and they do some clean out, which actually could be you in some cases, because we often find sections of pollen that gets really old inside a beehive and the bees end up never using it. So those are cells and frames worth swapping out. So the foragers, they stink at finding nutrition when it comes to pollen. Inside the hive, it gets rejected. So there aren't larvae being reared on coffee pollen. Now, unless it's a real coffee plant, that's a whole nother topic. Because where coffee is being grown and there are honeybees kept nearby, even though the coffee itself, the coffee bean, does not need to be pollinated, the coffee flower, which becomes the bean, which is the fruit of the coffee plant, it does not need honeybees, but those that are pollinated by honeybees produce larger, better coffee. beans. So, how's that? Brent Bronson, question number 6. Winnipeg, Canada region. I have double deep with heavy insulated top and a lighter R8 hive wrap. Bottom entrance only ventilation, and I left my entrances reduced to the smallest on the common wood entrance reducer. Watching your weekly winter entrance cleanings, I have entrances with big openings. Is that something I should be doing, or in extreme cold climate, is a smaller entrance better? Okay, so this is, again, I'm going to give you the parameters of my arrived at year-round entrance, because this entrance prevents rodents from getting in the wintertime, facilitates your cleaning tool from cleaning out dead bees, and in the summertime helps the colony reduce or defend against robbers or wasps and other things. So this is the opening. 2 1/4 of an inch wide. In centimeters, that's 5.7 centimeters. The opening height is 3/8 of an inch, or in millimeters, 0.375 millimeters. Or is that 3.75 millimeters? 0.375 millimeters. Yeah, maybe that's it. 0.375 centimeters. I don't know, I could be wrong. But do that conversion. It's 3/8 of an inch in height. So that's it. Warm climate, cold climate, makes no difference. That entrance would work. Ask a whole bunch of beekeepers. A bunch of different questions. I'm going to interview more people too, by the way. We're going to talk about those cavities, the way feral colonies set themselves up. I'm collecting a consensus on that. We're going to see. We're going to see what's going on. Question number 7 comes from Mark Wars 22. Can you explain what the role of a follower board is? Could one be used to split a single box into 2 separate hives, such as when making nukes, or will bees find their way around it? Thank you. Mark, Salt Lake City, Utah. So the follower board doesn't come into play with the Langstroth hive design because those are vertical. So now we're talking about the horizontal format hives where it's a single level, but all your frames are in a row. So now this is not the full-size hive. This is a Layens hive mock-up, and it's 1/3 scale, I believe. Yep, it says 1/3 scale. So if you notice on the front of it, we have these little control wheels here. So we have 3 potential entrances. These 2 are blocked. This one's open. So where will the brood be? Near this entrance. So if we look at the top of it, we have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these Layen frames in here. And then look, there's a solid board right there blocking that. So for all the bees know, this is the entire hive. This width, this height, these frames. All of this extra space over here with the stored frames is unavailable to the bees, so they don't even know it. So the purpose of the follower board here is it's removable. Solid board, no venting, nothing else. Comes right down and meets with the top of these frames, by the way. So when you put the cover on, there's no way, and this is true of all the Layens hives, there's no way for the bees to get on top of these frames and walk over the top and go down in between them. No space. So when you put that there, this is the entire box. The only thing that's accessible to the bees is what's inside here. And of course, we've got honeycomb to show you that that's what that would look like. Now, the question is, the purpose of the follower board is, let's say that now 4 out of 5 of these frames are in use. So we've got the brood, we've got pollen, we've got nectar, so honey's being stored, they're being capped. This last frame is being worked up. Now you take the follower board, you take one of these frames over here, you bring it on down, and you give them more space to expand, and you replace your follower board, and now that's the hive. So the question is, could you open this opening over here and establish a second hive? You can, but you need another follower board. So we have this one here, you'd make another one exactly the same specs, and you would start over here with 2 or 3 frames. You would open up this opening, and you would put your follower board right here. Now we've got a 3-frame colony. Now we're sharing space, so there is some mutual heat maybe benefit from having that. But you need to make sure that you've got enough frames The maximum that I understand that you would need would be 30. That would be a huge colony. When we talk about these Layens hives, these frames are deep. They're much bigger than a standard Langstroth deep frame. So if you've got 20 of these deep things, you've got a huge colony on your hands. So you could feasibly have a divider board here with 10 frames over here, a space, and then 10 frames over here with a divider board. 2 full colonies coming through different entrances. They happen to be on the same side of this hive. But that's not the end of the world. And then you have an insulated cover over the top. And I like the Layens hive, by the way. I like how it's insulated. I like that it has the deep frames. I don't like that it's not compatible with anything else except for other Layens hives. So when people have, Langstroth frames, and they want to put in that Layens hive to get things started, to get things kicked off, they want to do a split, it's hard. You have to technically shake your bees in there. It's very difficult to transfer comb. Dr. Leo Sherishkin, who is probably the ultimate authority on horizontal hives right now. And you can go to his website, horizontalhives.com. Tell him I sent you. He'll have no idea who I am. But he's done demos where he cuts the wooden ears off. So the ends of your frames, if this were a wooden frame, he takes a saw and he cuts off these ends, and then apparently they will fit inside a Layens frame. I had to wait till I got a swarm, and then I installed a swarm into my Layens hive, and that caused a very slow build up, and I'm waiting for spring to find out what the ultimate result of that was. But that's what the follower board does, and that's what would happen. You would need a couple of them, and you could certainly divide it, make nukes, things like that, or start them off. Or if you had queen cells, for example, in there, and you want to move your queen to a new area, you could probably just slide her right over there. Lots of experimentation opportunity. I like the Layens hives, just they're so incompatible with everything else. Question number 8, George Garcia. Another question and clarification. I believe it said that bees need twice the area so that they can condense honey. I don't understand how the flow hive can function. If it had the brood box and the honey box, how does the flow hive work if this is often stated observation holds true? You would think the flow hive would be a swarm producer if honey isn't harvested quickly. Okay, so for example, right behind me here, that's a flow hive. So the configuration that I do with flow hives is the same as with the other Langstroth hives, and the same rules of expansion apply. So if you've got a deep brood box, which is what I start all my hives with, and then you've got a medium super on there, which is where they're storing their honey, and then when I see that that's full, the next box up there is surplus honey that we're going to take off later. So that is going to be another medium box with frames in it that are going to draw out the comb, and they're going to store their honey and everything else in there. Then we're going to draw that off at the end of the year, at the end of the nectar flow, whatever's going on. Or it's when I put a flow super on there. Now let's say I put that flow super on there, which has 7 frames or 6 frames, depending on if it's on an 8-frame Langstroth box, it has 6 flow frames in it. If it's on a 10-frame Langstroth box, it has 7 flow super frames in it. And when you have those up there, you have to pay attention to see how they're filling up. If they're filling up too fast, and it's true what's being said here, the bees, in order to dry out the honey that they're making, they spread it out everywhere. And then overnight, they keep moving it and concentrating it into other cells while it's still open and uncapped. So then they just keep filling everything up. Now, if you're in jeopardy of filling up even your flow super, and they're not capped, and you see that all those cells are full, so that's unripe honey. There's too much moisture content in there. So in general terms, there's over 20% water in that nectar slant honey that's being stored in those cells. So you would have to put another box up there, or you would have to put another box underneath of it. If you're not prepared to harvest when they cap the cells, then you're going to have to expand the space. Otherwise, you can generate a swarm. And this is where inspections come into play. I don't care if you have a flow hive, a Layens hive, a Langstroth hive, whatever kind of hive you have. When you see action going on in the hives, you see a lot of population buildup, you really do have to inspect your brood areas to find out, do they still have space to lay their eggs? Are they filling too many of the cells with honey? Do they have room to expand to provide more space for honey stores? And you need to find out because that brood area needs to be left open for the queen to continue to lay her eggs. And you have this cycle of brood hatching out, new eggs being laid, and then going through that cycle, that 21-day cycle from egg to emergence. And that happens over and over again. But if they get full up here, they start storing their honey and resources down below. You need to expand, or you can push them out and cause a swarm. But one of the reasons you need to look in that brood box too is you need to find out if they're producing queen cells, because they can do that even if they're not fully maxed as far as storage goes. So it has nothing to do with whether it's a flow super or a standard super or a long laying or a lay-ins hive. You need to be aware of their usage of available space and make sure they have a clear brood area for their reproduction inside the hive. So you do have to look at them once in a while. So that's you got to keep up with them. Now, the cool thing about the flow hives is, and I know this makes people so mad, they don't even want to hear about that piece of gear. But if you have frames and you see that the ends are capped, then you can go ahead and you can drain off a single frame, and the bees will start storing nectar straight away into that. I've had a turnaround of 11 days. You empty one flow super frame, and that gets you about a half a gallon of honey. And the bees go straight to work and fill that back up and cap it again in 11 days. And that's without an upper entrance. So, you have to keep up with your bees regardless of the configuration, or they will, through congestion and everything else. It's one of the stimulation, that's one of the ways they're stimulated to reproduce and get out of there. Too many bees, too small space. Expand the space. That's the beauty of the Langstroth design. Question number 9, P. Grace. I've read a book, Swarming, Its Control and Prevention by L. E. Snellgrove, in order to learn how to properly use the double screen board. Here in Middle Tennessee, I'm going to complete hive inspections this week and will look to see if my hives currently, too, are ready for another box or not. I'm confused about the timing. Oh, good, we've already discussed the timing. 8 out of 10 frames, full. Then it's time to add a super. Put on one super at a time, unless you're going to be out of town. If you're leaving town and you can't tend to your bees during a strong nectar flow when everything comes into bloom, go ahead and put a couple boxes on there. But if you're local and you can check in on your bees weekly, it's amazing how fast, first of all, the population of the bees picks up, therefore honey production picks up. You can end up filling an entire super in a week. So you got to be careful to keep ahead of it. If you think you can't keep ahead of it, put 2 boxes on. And of course, the other thing is, if you are, let's say here's your deep super, and it's full. You put on your medium super, it gets full. Now, if you didn't catch them early enough, and that is 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 frames are almost all full of honey with drawn out comb, don't just add the empty box on top of that, because what can happen is, that super that is chock-a-block with honey now capped, even though they haven't swarmed or anything else yet as far as you know, it creates what's called a honey cap kind of. So it's important to add that other super on before they've completed that box, but yet they're well on their way to finishing it. So once they're well on their way, the cells are drawn out and they're filling them up, you need to put it ahead of time. Now let's say you were too late, it's full, it's just jammed with honey, which is a good thing, they're super productive. But you pull that box and put your super on under it. So the full box goes on top, and your next box that you're just now adding goes directly over the brood box. So now they'll start to fill that. Because sometimes they'll think that's the extremity of the hive. If you didn't put on your super before they finished out all those frames, not every time, but I'm just telling you a way to fail safe. Provide the extra space for the new comb and for the new honey to be stored under that completely full super if you didn't get ahead of it. So, that's it. I think that's the question for that one. So they have no medium frames, pulled honey. I'm very confused about this timing. The timing is you got to stay ahead of them before every frame is full and capped. If not, move it up and replace it underneath directly over your brood box. Question number 10, Sean Land. Let's see. Okay, now Sean, I already answered Sean's question because what he was dealing with is a very hot hive of bees. So some people don't know what that term is. hot hive. What's that mean? It means they're defensive. It means that when you walk out there and you're innocent and you're just looking at your beehives, you get butted in the head right away. You get that high-pitched, geared up revving of their little wing motors, and they're very intent on getting right in your face. That's a guard bee. That's probably giving you a warning, but one or two of those, not the end of the world, not fun. Definitely want to have a veil on when you start getting activity like that. But if you've got 20 or 30 and you're being intercepted by these defenders of the hive when you're still 50 feet away or 30 feet away, now things are kind of abnormal. Unless you've already been a goofball and you've been harassing those bees by opening up that beehive every other day and pulling frames and looking at everything because you're just so curious, you have to know what's going on in there, they can become defensive. You can get an attitude change. So it all comes down to a bunch of contributing factors. But depending on where these things are located, if they become dangerous, guess who has to deal with them? You, the beekeeper. And this may never happen to you. You may be just one of those people that just all of your colonies are just super friendly all the time. Years ago when I was keeping Italian bees, the very first bees I ever got were Italian bees. After we took off honey, and we weren't like banging them around and slamming through them. We're not commercial beekeepers. We didn't have a time schedule. We took our time, pulled the frames carefully. We weren't smashing bees and things like that. But once you had been in there and meddled with those hives, you had a good 2 or 3 days where you were going to just get stung when you walked out there. So they would just come right at you. And my wife got stung in her hair, on her head, so... one of the things I wanted to talk about related to this is you need to be prepared to deal with a colony of bees that gets too hot, that becomes too defensive, that starts stinging people just because they came into your driveway or something, especially if you're one of these backyard beekeepers who has bees in very close proximity to where vehicles are driving, kids are riding bikes, maybe there's a playground right there. You're going to have to deal with genetic issues because these are traits that are passed on genetically, so the behavior, the temperament of your bees, how passive or not passive they are. If you're living in town somewhere, you're really going to have to gear yourself and your bee management towards bees that are very passive, laid back, easygoing. You also want to make sure to use smoke or honeybee healthy and sugar water and things like that anytime you approach that hive, to look in it, to lift the cover to see what they're doing. Your methodology needs to be solid. You need to be confident. You need to be slow and steady and not smash bees as you go, because the other thing that can kick them off is if you've got, like my grandson who likes to run around and show me all the stingers in his little bee gloves, the pheromones, the alarm pheromones, are still on his glove. So wherever he goes, one little stinger in the glove causes more bees to sting that same spot. Same thing for you. If you've got an outfit on that you have had an encounter with a defensive colony of bees and there's a bunch of stings on your suit, on your gloves, things like that, time to swap out, so have more than one bee suit. Or you have to run it through the laundry to make sure that you're going to eliminate those pheromones that are still on the suit that can remind them, oh yeah, attack that suit. So there are a lot of things that affect how defensive your bees are, but I need to tell you, you need to be prepared. Depending on where you live, this is more likely than other areas, but especially in some southern areas, you need to have a full bee suit at the ready. Now I know a lot of people equate your beekeeping skills with the amount of beekeeping equipment that you wear. I'm not one of those people, so if you show up in a full bee suit head to toe with the spats around your ankles and your baseball cap and your hoodie on underneath and you've got the heaviest gloves you can find, that's up to you, that's your choice. Now there are drawbacks to that. Your dexterity is limited. If you're using rawhide, cowhide gloves, you're more apt to solicit a sting than if you had goatskin gloves, for example. So if you're deciding right now between the two, we use cowhide to test the defensiveness of a hive by raking a piece of cowhide over the top and seeing how many stings go to it. And where the goatskin gets very little activity, rawhide, just smell it yourself. That leather has a strong odor, an animal odor, and here you are with that animal odor right next to that colony of bees. But if you've got those, you get no response, you've got really passive bees. So you need an action plan, and you need a full bee suit because you are the front line of defense if you get a colony of bees and starts attacking everybody and their dog and their cat and the parakeet and everything else. It's up to you. So, if there's no indicator, if you've not been in your hives at all, nothing has been bothering them. You don't know that unless there's a camera in your bee yard. Is there a skunk harassing that colony of bees? Has that been a change in bee behavior? When you get a package of bees, and a lot of you are going to be doing that come spring, you can get a package of bees from somewhere. You don't know the disposition of those bees for how long? You don't know the disposition of those bees for 30 days. What? There's a whole bunch of bees. I'm going to know what those bees are like. No, you're not. Because the queen, every bee in your colony is eventually going to come from that mated queen that's in that package. That package of bees could be completely unrelated to the queen. They have nothing to do genetically with the queen. And so their behavior as a package has nothing to do with the colony of bees that you're ultimately going to be the owner of. So what happens if that queen, when she gets out of that cage and you've released her within 72 hours and she gets out and those workers that came with her are tending to her and she starts laying her eggs, you're 21 days out from those eggs emerging as adult bees. Those are now house bees. So you don't still know what their temperament is. So while they're nurse bees working inside the hive and before they get to the guard bee stage, another week after that or so, then you're going to find out what the disposition is. So you're 30 days out from knowing what that queen was really made of when you got her. So, be ready for anything. Have a plan. And I've also told Sean to please let me know how things went. Because he's afraid that it's a hot hive that needs to be killed. And he was going to get an Italian nuke for my second hive box from a well-known source, but maybe I just need to kill this hive and get 2 nukes, but I don't want to overreact in case it's something I'm doing wrong. So bring in a skilled beekeeper. I personally enjoy going to apiaries that have colonies of bees that are really acting up because it's all relevant to your experience with bees. For some people, 10 or 15 bees hovering around their face and trying to sting through their veil, and I believe Sean got stung through the veil because the veil was right up against the nose, and of course a bee parked a stinger right there. Baseball cap, keep your veil away from your face. But I like to go and evaluate the defensive levels of those bees. So if you're in my area and you've got an issue with a hot colony of bees, or you've got some ridiculous hornets or bald-faced hornets or some yellow jackets that have grown out of control, contact me because I will come to see what's going on. But often you can remove the queen. I recommended that, see, here's the problem. If you tell somebody who's got a really hot hive to get in there and remove the queen, because they're borderline, they're not going to kill your cat, but you can't go out in your bee yard without being fully protected all the time. Who wants that? So now you could requeen them, but you have to get in there and you're going to be attacked by your bees the whole time you're trying to locate the queen to remove her. And then I recommended they install a QMP pheromone, so a queen mandibular pheromone, a synthetic pheromone that you stick in there that prevents them from making laying workers. And then you fly in a queen of known genetics that are calm, that are going to be good for your bees. And then you'll remove that placeholder, that queen mandibular pheromone, the synthetic install there. You remove that, and then they'll accept the new queen that you put in there, hopefully. But and then you alter the genetics. And then how long will you be waiting? Just like I said before, now we're 30 days out from knowing if that worked and what the final disposition was. So there's levels of it. Sorry to be kind of vague on that, but it's not a straightforward answer. If they kill animals, I euthanize the colony. I don't play games at all. No games with killer bees. And I don't mean killer by name, just they actually kill things. They kill your hamsters. Anyway, number 11. This is from John B. from Grand Haven, Michigan. Getting packages in late April, and I want to be able to do splits from, and will I be able to do splits from any of them yet this year? Okay, so this is in Michigan, Grand Haven, Michigan. Here's the thing, for those of you who have not bought bees yet, when you look at packaged bees, that will be the slowest buildup of all the bee sources that you can get. If you get a nucleus colony, which people refer to as a nuke, that's usually 5 frames of bees in production. They're already laying, the queen's laying, everything's good, and that's your fastest buildup. So if you had a fantastic season with plenty of forage and you started with a nucleus colony, it's feasible that you could do a split if they really fill out that 10 frame deep brood box. If you've got 6 frames of good brood patterns, then you could feasibly split that into 2. Now that means then that you have to do it early in the year, so it's risky. With a package, I personally wouldn't do it. When you install a package, you want to nurse the package up, so you want them to have sugar syrup and things like that so they can build fast. And of course, if you're new, then because they're also building comb and everything else, so there's a lot of demand on them the first year. So generally, you want to give them that first year to just prepare themselves infrastructure-wise and everything else so they can get through the coming winter, because your bees are preparing for winter as soon as spring hits. So generally, you don't want to do splits and make a bunch of weak colonies. And also, you want to know if those bees are going to do well in your vicinity going through a winter. That's why if I'm going to make splits, I'm going to make additions to my apiary, I want to do it with a colony of bees that has a queen that has made it through one of my winters. Then I know better than if I just had a package, if they're going to do well in my area. So the ones that come out strongest in spring, those are your split candidates. So I recommend getting them through that first year, seeing how they're doing, taking notes on what their strong traits are and everything else, and then come the following spring, see what you have, and then work with those for your splits, because now you know that those bees are doing well where you live. That's just my advice. So, next question, number 12. A lot of questions. This is from Jeff Hoffman, Mint Hill, North Carolina. If you wanted to promote the bees to make foundation, either for replacement or new foundation in the absence of a nectar flow, that's hard. What is the recommendation of sugar water concentration to get this started? What is the temperature ranges to safely apply, assuming using an internal feeder? Okay, so I've noticed the best way to get your bees to build comb, to build infrastructure when it's foundationless, for example, because it's a huge demand on them. They're going to use honey a lot. And the 1-to-1 sugar syrup, this is very vague, by the way. But the lighter sugar syrup, like 1-to-1 by weight, is 1 part sugar, 1 part water. Don't get all, chemistry lab on that. You can add a little more sugar and so on. So, which is, by the way, a lot of sugar. So if you consider, here I get this wrong all the time for some reason. So we have a gallon of water. How many pounds of water is that? 8. So now we have a 4-pound bag of sugar. We need 2 4-pound bags of sugar mixed into that 8-pound gallon of water to make 1-to-1. Then the bees use that as their carbohydrate for energy, but they also make comb out of it. And I've noticed, by the way, that the comb, they do make comb really fast with that, but the comb that they make is as white can be. It's as white as this sheet of paper, and it doesn't seem to be really strong compared to when they do it from the nectar that they're gathering from flowers. So I really hope that kicks in too. And the good advantage of that is that if you're providing the 1-to-1 sugar syrup on there, they have a constant source. So in other words, if it rains for 3 days, they can still build infrastructure. They can still build honeycomb. And then, of course, as the season continues, they continue to work and rework and reinforce comb. So it would darken, get stronger going forward. But there's a configuration. This is what I noticed last year with the nucleus colonies. So the nucleus hive box, 5 deep frames in a wooden box. And then the box over the top of that, 5 deep frames, and you can do, I like to put a foundation in, foundation less, foundation, foundation less. And so then they will build out the foundationless frames, and you can use that for cut comb and everything else. And the reason they're both deep boxes and why that's good is because those later become for brood frames when you're doing splits and things like that. You have these brand new frames of honeycomb, and for some reason that 5/5 arrangement, they build out the comb up there so much faster. No top entrance, no top venting, just those migratory covers on there. And I didn't feed them, so they were, and they're strong right now. So we've got stuff to talk about when the weather finally breaks around here. I know a lot of you are already working your bees and everything else is going great. Well, up here in the northeastern United States, we're still in winter, as you saw, single digits this morning. So those nucleus colonies were ignored, and they're making it through winter. They were not fed or anything else. But if you're using them for comb building units, I did a quick drawing here. This is the 5-frame nuke. I use the ones that have the front hole there, and then we have the control wheel on the front. Then we have a second story. That's after these 5 frames down here are full and in use or nearly completed. Then I put the second box up here, which is a deep frame 5, and these are wooden boxes, by the way. Now on top of that, remember there's just a migratory cover, and it's only a 5-frame width box, so it can't accommodate a rapid round feeder. It also cannot accommodate these big tank feeders that hold a gallon of syrup. So you can build another box that goes on the outside of that. So it's a feeder shim that has a bridge piece that goes over the top of the lower box here to hold it in place, front and back. And then that houses that syrup for you so that these bees down below have a resource that's consistent. And you use these as frame builders, wax builders. For other hives as a resource, for me, that's what the nucleus hives are for anyway. Extra queens, extra eggs, extra larvae, nurse bees, whatever I want, because they grow like gangbusters in those tiny spaces, and you have to share the resources from those hives or they just get out of hand and they swarm on you. So I'm a fan of double height nucleus wooden boxes. And I did put insulator tops on them this winter. But again, they had the honey that they stored for the previous year. No supplemental feed, no Hive Alive fondant packs, no extra sugar for emergency resources, just an insulated top. Nothing else is insulated. And very strong in a small space. That's what I would do. And 1-to-1, has statistically been the best for them to build comb and infrastructure. Question number 13 comes from Etta Ingram, Sherman, Texas. I seen your hives to a house and was wondering if you could embellish on how you chose the location of your hives. We're pretty new beekeepers, starting 3rd year, and always here to move the hives away from homes. I appreciate your feedback. Okay. Placement. For those of you who are starting out with your bees this year, where to put those beehives. I'm lucky. I live in the country. I live on a dirt road. But my hives are very close to the driveway. So I have a building between the driveway and my hives. It is 24 by 32 feet. And so they're only 26 or 27 feet from where people are parking their cars. And I've not had a problem with that, other than, like I said before, years ago. If we had somebody coming out here for pictures or something like that, I couldn't work on the bees. So it'd be like, what? Photo session coming? Now I can't work on the bees because the bees will run around and sting people. Those Italian bees that I had would fly around and sting people for days afterwards. So we had to plan it. So I couldn't get into the beehives because they're so close. So that is something that you have to think about. But I like to have them, they're on the southern side of that building, south-facing side. So winter is good for them because the low sun in the southern hemisphere is shining on them, and the wintertime is good. I also, by the way, when you're looking at your buildings and thinking about having your hives up against or near a building, think of the overhang on that building. And if you've got gutters, where the rain's going to fall, if you don't have gutters, also where the snow's going to fall when it slides off the roof and comes straight down. If your hives are right there under that soffit area, They're just going to get caked with snow as it slides off. The other thing is I space them away from the building so I can pull a wagon behind there. So when you're working on your hives, you have plenty of space. And so if I did it again, I like it near the house just because I like to go and check on them all the time. But you need to think about where people are walking, where trucks are coming, UPS, FedEx, your mailman. So all of these vehicles generate vibrations. So if you have touchy bees at all, they're going to sense those vibrations, the exhaust that's coming off of these vehicles, and they might get a reaction. So consider prevailing winds also. So where the winds are, again, our winds are predominantly out of the west. So those are things to consider too on where you're going to put your hives and the flyway of the bees. So I have that building there, so they fly out away from the building, not straight over the driveway. So lots to consider. Where do your pets like to go? You don't want your hives there either. So just a lot of things to think about, but I like having them close by. And there are plenty of people that are keeping bees right in urban areas, right in their backyard. And they put stockade fences around them and things like that to get the bees to fly up and over so they're out of people's flight path. And that's it. So I hope that helps. I've got right now 19 viable colonies right next to my barking area. So they have to be friendly bees. And they are, thank goodness. Question number 14, moving on. Alan from Junction City, Kansas. I was thinking of ordering some better comb. When reading the installation of the foundation, they recommended to wire them in, but only talked about for honey. Would I still need to wire them in and tooth them in the center if I used for brood frames? Yes. Biggest mistake ever was with that better comb, which is a synthetic comb, by the way. And if you don't wire it, it can sag, even though you're not in the South. The original batch came out and the instructions had us putting toothpicks in. So even if it's just for brood and things like that, you want to put the wires in the frames and you want to put the comb in the wire. I did videos about that. I'll link a Better Comb video that explains that and shows you how I do it. It's very easy to do, but definitely want the wires. I had plenty of sagging comb. And Better Comb, for those of you who don't know, is a synthetic beeswax. It, biochemistry-wise, it matches actual beeswax very closely. It's just not made by bees. And I think it's also sold as Hexacell in other countries. So Better Comb, sold by Better Bee, and I'll show you the video. You can see what that's like. The bees use it for brood, for honey, for everything. But you need to, of course, mark those frames too so that you know that that's Better Comb and not real beeswax so that you don't use it as a beeswax product later. Keep it separate. Question number 15, last question of the day from Tom Jefferson. Here's a weird, maybe dumb question I thought of today while checking on the bees after work. Today's temps were in the mid-60s, East Tennessee, just southwest of Knoxville. And I noticed the bees bringing in tons of pollen. I estimate 2 out of 3 bees were returning with pollen during the time I was watching. If the environment has lots of pollen available, but nectar or another sugar source is not available, or at least below what they need, can they eat pollen, bee bread to survive, or will they starve? They always need both. Well, they need the nectar, the carbohydrate resource, for their fundamental survivability. So that's nectar from either flowers, or you're providing a synthetic nectar in the form of sugar syrup. But what it really comes down to is that pollen is key for brood production. So all the bees in the hive cannot feed off of pollen to sustain themselves. So they absolutely need the carbohydrate. They need that nectar source, which is also stored in the form of honey inside the hive. That's why they save the honey to begin with. So they need, if you had to take one thing away and hope that your bees are still going to survive, it would be to take away the pollen, the protein, because that stops their production, their reproduction. But the carbohydrate is there to sustain the bees and keep them alive. So in times of pollen dearth, for example, even if the queen has laid eggs, some of those workers, if there's not enough pollen coming in, or if there's not enough stored pollen, they'll actually eat the eggs and prevent them from developing, knowing that they don't have the resources based on the pheromones, the scents that are inside the hive they know that they don't have the resources necessary coming in that landing board for the queen to lay eggs that they can then produce and feed, because they're going to hatch on the 3rd day, and then they're going to feed them up to the 9th day with bee bread, which is, of course, consumed by the nurse bees and then produced through their mandibular glands. So they're giving them what people call, royal jelly for the first 3 days, but they're making stuff with the bee bread, and then they're reprocessing that and putting it out. That's why you see that milky gel that's in the cells that's feeding those open larvae. That's actually been processed by the nurse bees. So the nurse bees are eating the pollen and producing that. It's very critical for them to produce, but if you're talking about fundamental survival, nectar is at the top of that, or honey. So that's it for today. Now we're going to talk about the shout out. So today's shout out, oh, by the way, because if you're going to be a beekeeper, and when you're a backyard beekeeper, a sideliner or whatever, if every time you turn around and you need some wooden configuration for your hives, if you have to get somebody to make that for you, it's very frustrating. The other thing is, if you can't get somebody to make it for you, then you have to order it somewhere, and it's going to be expensive, and you have to wait for it to be there. So I recommend every beekeeper get some fundamental carpentry skills. And it's just so practical to have woodworking tools, basic woodworking tools, and have the ability to repair your own woodenware, or even in some cases take advantage of some cast off wood and things like that and make modifications, build your own hive stands and things like that. So today's shout out goes to a YouTuber that is also a beginning beekeeper who has made a woodworking station. So if you have a small amount of space, this is the setup. So you have a table saw, you have a compound miter saw, and all the other kind of the fundamental woodworking tools that you would need to do a lot of different things. Every beekeeper should have it. So the beekeeping channel that we're doing a shout out to today is called Aberlend, Aberlend. So I'm going to put a link down there below, and there's a 3-part series on there called the Ultimate Wood Workstation. It's a modular workstation, so it's in a big square, and all of these components go together, and he has a step-by-step demonstration on how to do it. Currently has 319 subs. It'd be great if you go there, say hello, look at the bee videos, but look at this woodworking station, and maybe you'll get some ideas on how to set up your own woodworking tools so that you can manufacture your own hive visors, covers, stands, maybe your bee boxes, anything else you want to do in beekeeping. If you can make it yourself, you're way ahead. So thanks for being here today. I hope you got something out of today's video. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions. Thanks for watching to the very end, and I hope that you have a fantastic weekend. Thanks for being here.